All right, everyone, we're here with the lovely, Karin Melin. Is that how you say?
Melin officially, but
Karin
I'll
Melin.
take all variations of it.
All right, cool. Well, we're here. Um, I've known Karin for a wee while, through my mother and my sister, and we've been in contact for quite some time now, and had a lovely session with Karin just recently, and yeah, so she's here. I'd love maybe give us a little intro and little 2-minute story of who you are and what you do.
I love trying to encapsulate who I am in 2 minutes.
Good luck.
Thank you. So I'll start with what I do right now, because that's, I think, where we'll probably have some overlap in discussion. And I'm working as a somatic experiencing practitioner, which is a modality that came out of the genius of a man called Peter Levine, and it's basically about renegotiating trauma. I came to this work through a personal need where I had been a high performance athlete, an engineer, and I was taking up new practices, so new, less structured practices like authentic dance. I had done all kinds of meditation work, and then I got into this ecstatic dance situation, practice, and strange things started occurring to me. And I couldn't explain them, and nobody else could explain them. And at one point, I was guided to a book that Peter had written called Waking the Tiger, which is quite well known. And I read it and I thought, well, that's what my physiology is doing, but I have no relationship to trauma. I'm not traumatized. But this is what my physiology is doing, and nobody has been able to explain it before. And so that's how I got into the work. Who I am, way bigger question.
Good, good. Nice. Well, that Peter Levine's work for the very amazing fellow and his Waking the Tiger, and I have a hunch that we have a bit of tiger in us, or a fair bit of animal in us. You could think of our bodies have been adapting for millions of years. Could you speak to some of his teachings and what you've learned around how we are still very much animals?
Sure. We are still animals,
Yeah.
but we also have this really lovely developed prefrontal cortex that tells us we're not animals. We can choose not to behave in an animalistic manner, except when we are put under duress. So we're very capable at overriding our true, deep, organic impulses, that desire to tear something apart. In civilized society, we don't do that. It's been conditioned out of us. And so to get the approval of others, we don't act on that. The more stressful a situation is, the harder it is to use our decision-making faculties and our emotional response to others to negate that impulse. And so we find that the more stress a person is under, the more their physiology is in this hyper-aroused state where they're basically having to hold back what's underneath, the more likely they are to switch into that very primitive functioning and release that inner animal. And the development of the brain over thousands of years shows this. We went from that really survival-based brain to being able to have more thought, and then the evolution from thinking brain, rational decision making, into our connective emotional responses. And so essentially what happens when we're under duress is we drop down into the very basic animal brain. And those organic impulses, they're fantastic. They are, I'm hungry, let's eat now. Not, oh, I think I should have something later. It's like, I'm hungry. They're like, this isn't safe. Get me out of here. And so they're really strong indicators. I'm attracted to that person. Those are all really basic animalistic instincts that we have. And most of us in the Western world in particular don't really pay much attention to those.
Right. And that,
And I think,
I mean, I have a little I know that I do it, all the time. And one thing that happens to me when there's this kind of two, if you want to call it, two aspects of myself fighting against each other, is gets damn exhausting.
yeah, really exhausting. Right. Because if you're hungry and you want to eat and you don't, what you're having to do is you're having to use more energy in your system to suppress that impulse. And that gradually gets to the point where you just can't suppress it anymore. You're too tired.
Right.
And so you either end up with all of these strong impulses coming out, or the alternative is that you collapse into complete fatigue and exhaustion. And we see this in people all the time. It's tough when you've got those dual impulses, when you're not really aligned with that inner impulse and what you can regulate, where people will be functioning and then they're going out and they're biking and they're doing activities and then they crash. And then as soon as they've recovered a little bit, they go right back to the high adrenaline activities.
Right.
You bounce up and down instead of a beautiful, smooth undulation of, okay, I can do that. And then I can also go for a walk, or I can also have a conversation without getting really agitated.
Right.
Oh, and then I can rest and get a reasonable amount of sleep every night rather than needing 2 weeks crashed out.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And with this, when we have this animal part of ourself, and then let's call them patterns. We have patterns that come on and they create this way of being in the world that maybe pushes away that animal self or doesn't trust it or whatever it may be. When does this start? Is it build gradually, or is it...
Great question. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I studied with Peter Levine, did all of the somatic experiencing. I've studied master classes with him. And I also have studied something called somatic, which is called somatic practice. It's Kathy Kane's work. And it deals with the touch. So she was a body worker who got into working with trauma and the physiology through touch. And so feeling the difference in tissues in the body that are holding all of this energy, all of this override energy. And then she works with another practitioner, Steve Terrell. These are all like big names in the trauma world.
Right.
And it's all primarily based on polyvagal theory. But there's this attachment component of being born dependent on another person. And so our nervous systems are not able to regulate themselves when we're born. And if you look at other animals, they're born capable of walking.
Yeah.
Elephants and giraffes can walk minutes after they're born. We can't feed ourselves. We can't walk. Like, we're really dependent on our caregivers. And so those early stages are completely reliant on what's going on around us. And so those patterns can begin as early as in our formative development. And then they establish over time. If you have a significant event, and whether that's positive or negative, it's just an event with a lot of charge, it leaves a strong impression in the body and the nervous system. And you learn to navigate it. So years later, you've been navigating that experience of heightened activation in a particular way. And so your pattern is set, it becomes habit. But the original impulse was out of a survival need, was out of a, I need connection, I need food, I need to not be bleeding, whatever it is. And of course, our early impulses for that are connection. You know, little babies, they want connection.
Right, right. Yeah, well, I've just
So,
spent the last few years connecting with my loved ones and my little ones, and it's, yeah, you can see they're yearning for skin, you know? Yeah.
right, right. Like, give me contact.
Hmm.
And I imagine with your kids, you also notice that they learn how to manipulate you a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, but they didn't learn that without it having been successful at some point.
Hmm.
And once they figure out, hey, this works, then they'll repeat it. Then they become masters at it. It's like, oh, look, dad's a little frustrated and he's busy and he's already said that he needs to get something done. So if I make a big enough noise over here, I'll get his attention.
Right,
Or if I do something I've been told I'm not meant to do, or that's super cute, whatever it is, it gets the attention. And all the child's wanting is that connection.
right, right.
Right? Like the nervous system is finding different ways to organize around this animal instinct.
Hmm. So, as say in our adult years here,
Yeah.
how are some ways that we can start to notice, get curious, and pick up on some of those patterns of how we, um, it, I want to call it our patterns of good enough for now. The patterns are working, they're working pretty good, and they've brought us all up to this point. But also, maybe we've found their limitations as well. How do we start to kind of get a glimpse into that and see ourselves in the moment?
So, one of the ways to really bring yourself back to the moment is to use your primary senses. And so, curiosity about your primary senses.
Right.
And so, you can look around the room or outside, and what do you see? Like, as if it's first time you've ever looked at the tree or the skies, and what the sky, what is the color? Is the green of the tree the same? And instantly that interrupts any other activation that there was, because it's forcing you to be present with what's happening right now. It's giving your system new input. So we can do that visually. We can do it tactilely. You know, what's the quality of the desk? How does it feel without looking at it and analyzing it visually? Because our eyes are incredibly dominant.
Right.
What does it feel like? Oh, is it different with the backside of your fingers? Or does it feel the same with your pinky as your thumb? And it narrows the focus for your nervous system to start to be able to interrupt those strategies. So that's step one.
Right.
Like, yeah, there's patterns, which we all recognize. Here's our behavior. Oh, right, I always crave this food when I'm upset or whatever it is. But interrupting it helps to give the opportunity for something else to happen.
Right.
There's the standard, become aware of your behaviors, notice them, choose something different, but that's all very intellectual. And when we really have deep patterns, we have to use these other aspects that we have of being animals.
Right.
What do you hear? When you listen, what is it that you're hearing? Can you hear different sounds? And the more curious we get about that, the more the physiology has the opportunity to shift.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I notice, speaking of animals, in my dog, where the dog, it doesn't really have an in-between state. It's either quite relaxed or it's on. And what I see in myself and many people in my lives, we're kind of stuck in the middle somewhere, where it's like the ability to really to relax, that capability is not there often, I know in myself. And sometimes the ability to really ramp up too isn't even there. And it's
Yeah,
this spot in between. Could you speak of that?
sure. So your dog is quite young, right? I'm pretty
She's
sure this is
about a
still,
year old now yet.
yeah, so puppy, that will tame down.
Okay.
Just so you know, that's puppy behavior. And that's a little bit of the I can't regulate my own energy,
Right.
right? It's like I'm on. I might as well be on like a light switch, or I'm off. And what we're really looking for is a dimmer that can go all the way to darkness to rightful brightness
Right.
with the in between. And so some of that comes with maturation, understanding that not everything in life is just absolutely exciting all the time or overwhelming. And that's a little bit of the co-regulation and just learning from the other people in your environment that this is a normal functioning. You know, you don't need to expend additional energy.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about that middle zone where people don't really experience any highs, any excitement, any joy, or can't get their bodies to move quickly, and then they also can't rest, quite often their systems are a little bit stuck. And that means the physiology doesn't know how to shift out of this state that they've found themselves in. And that state is generally the safest, most secure state for them. So when we take it back to nervous system level, we're trying to nudge people out of their comfort zone. And we're trying to nudge them either into more heightened activation, more sympathetic arousal, or we're trying to nudge them into more true parasympathetic, restful state. But the challenge is they've got a little bit of the sympathetic stuck on and some parasympathetic stuck on.
Mm.
So it's like gas and brake pedal simultaneously.
Right.
Can't go anywhere. And the way we look at it when we're working with this physiology rather than with the behaviors where, you know, people will often be like, okay, I just need to get out for a walk. Like I have to do this. Or I need to put my computer away before bedtime, put my phone away so that there's a chance that the brain can slow down. We actually have to work really slowly to create small nudges, small experiences of more or less stimulus in a safe environment, a secure, stable environment. So their nervous system learns that they actually can go there without some threat occurring. So we get stuck there because we're tired. We get stuck in fatigue because we've been through something that was really big and didn't know how to handle it. So here's the management strategy of how to get through it. Oh, I kind of numb out a little bit. Oh, and I only eat certain things and I really just don't engage the same way. Because as soon as you introduce some of that emotion or some of the physical sensation, you have to be with it.
Right.
And, you know, that's not always fun.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, but it's not always fun.
Right.
So, you know, those are situations that have developed over time. It's not like somebody yesterday was really active and fully experiencing life in all directions. And then today just has no lust for anything. That's not what happens. It's the accumulation of having to hold these dual impulses that you were talking about before. The one I think I should be doing and the one my animal wants to do.
Right. Right.
Right. And so it's just this accumulation of exhaustion, of holding back from that animalistic response.
Right. And I like,
If we extrapolate.
I like that metaphor of the gas and the brake at the same time, where that captures like the just how hard that engine has to work
Yeah,
to just roll the tires a couple turns. Yeah.
right. And if you've got the gas and the brake on in a car, what happens eventually?
Burnout.
Burnout. Right. And if you were able to take a little bit of pressure off the brake, the car can move. The engine can actually do something with all of this energy. The same way, if you can take a little bit of pressure off the gas, then the brake can do its job without having this huge load. So it's a really accurate description of exactly what's going on inside the body at a really micro level.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to bring up too is where, and you kind of mentioned, speaking of the individual and like our own internal environment, and then of course, you're mentioned, in the West and the waters that we all swim in too. And the one thing I know is
Yeah.
there's so many offerings out there for me to numb myself, which of just like, don't forget, that struggle inside, just take this, just have this
Yeah.
drink, have this sugar, distract yourself with this. That must make it almost a little bit, is that make it kind of a little bit hard to be a human being and to be this human animal?
It makes it difficult to be a regulated human being unless you've developed a capacity where you can take a course and then you can go rest.
Right.
But the number of offerings and our collective addiction to the quick fix definitely makes it difficult. You were mentioning your dog earlier. When an animal is sick, what do? They lie down, they rest. They don't go for a walk, right? Like they just hang out. They will lie there until they're well. What do? Society has kind of said, go to work, get better, here, take this. So it goes against that organic understanding that the body is tired, that it needs rest. And that can happen in any different way. It can be occurring through emotions. And, we recognize it most with grief, when grief comes up. So you go through a breakup, you lose somebody close to you. Everybody feels that. And when you watch the behaviors of people, most people do one of two things. They block it out, they numb it, they just try to get right back into their life as normal, or they collapse and numb out that way.
Right.
And what we're really looking for is this window in between where you don't shut down completely, but you cry, you're sad, you rest more. You acknowledge when being around people is difficult. And so it's this opening of being true to what that organic impulse is that prevents us from having to get so tired.
Right.
And that happens emotionally. It can happen physically. I mentioned earlier that I had done all kinds of movement work. I was a high performance gymnast. And so huge amounts of physical stress on the body, incredible amounts of structure. Like if we're talking perfectionism, that's the
Yeah.
sport.
Yeah.
And it was all controlled. You know, there's no climate, there's no moving ball. The balance beam is 16 feet long, 4 inches wide. It's 1 meter, 10 inches high, and it never moves. So everything is really, really controlled. So for me, control was amazing. I knew how to do that exceptionally well. Lack of control, you know, moving for the sake of movement, suddenly brought up all of these emotions that I didn't know I had because they had been so carefully held in place by my old system, my old strategy. And so that's a little bit of this, you know, the world's got a million offerings, and right now they're everywhere online. And it's okay to not change your life right now, to just adapt as you can. You don't have to conquer it. Rest. Drop into a yoga class. If you can't finish it, it's okay to sit and watch the rest or listen to the rest. That's, you know, I'm sure that if you were teaching a class and somebody was exhausted, as a teacher, you wouldn't be trying to get them to do more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like listen to what you're able to do and do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Don't look around. Don't believe that this is going to be the thing that's going to get you through. So it is a very, I mean, it's precarious because we've really been taught not to listen to ourselves, not to listen to that animal within, and to rely on what's outside of us. And that's made us all really tired.
Right. Right.
Really, really hungry and really tired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
It's,
Cool. Yeah. The when teaching yoga workshop, when we were breaking down things, I like to use the metaphor of be bad students. Like if you want
yeah.
to lay on the floor, do it. If you want to walk outside, do it. If you want, just yeah.
And that's, I mean, that's fantastic for people to be given that permission.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people in the class, that's going to be their habit, is being bad students,
That's true. That's true.
right?
Yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
so for them, you kind of have to guide them back to that. And for other people, you know, if I had walked into your class after coming off of gymnastics and you told me to be a bad student, I would have been devastated at the idea that I could leave a class or not do something, because it was such a bad context for me. Like, what happens if you just don't do this particular posture? Would have been as much as I could have tolerated,
Right.
because I knew how to override everything in my body so much. But yeah, being a bad student, when you're used to trying to do it right, it's a really good learning.
Cool.
Fun too.
So say when we're myself or some of the other people who practice yoga, when we're practicing and we're moving physically through the postures and finding our breath, what would be some ways where, and I notice this in myself, sometimes I'm practicing and I'm not there. I'm somewhere
Right.
else. I'm thinking about all different things and I'm not actually noticing my body. It's almost like when sometimes I drive the car and it's like, how did I get home? But I'm home. That's sort of
Yeah.
checking out, but still there. And then there's
Yeah.
sometimes where I'm practicing the yoga and it's like almost like matrix like, where I'm feeling everything in the body and every breath and hearing everything, and that's kind of as far as they go for myself anyway. So what would be some ways to know when we're kind of disconnected from ourselves, even though we're doing the practice, and some ways that we know when we're kind of more arrived into ourself, or into that our animal as it moves and breathes.
Well, you gave the example of the most common one, which is I'm thinking about other things.
Right.
Right? Like that's the biggest clue. Look, I can do this movement and it's so habituated in me, my muscles know how to move it, and I'm somewhere else. So that's a really good clue that you're not fully in your practice. Okay? And again, that matrix-like quality, when you can sense everything, that's part of our interoception, which is how we sense our experience from the inside, right? And so you've got that happening simultaneously with the proprioception and the kinesthetics of the posture. And it feels, well, how does it feel to you when that happens?
Yeah, it feels, there's two pieces to it. That feels like I'm connected to everything around me. There's the boundary of the body changes in a way. There's also, but there's also, I'm very defined in the body as well. There's, yeah, it's just, it's almost like a high resolutionness, but it's not a high energy quality, but especially with the yoga, it's a chill, but there's a very, yeah, it's like the resolution got turned up or something.
Perfect. Okay, so the resolution gets turned up, which means you're experiencing more of what's available.
Right.
You also described that it's not high energy, which I'm interpreting as it's not taking a ton of effort.
Yes. Yeah, that would be it. Yeah.
So there's a certain quality of ease to it, and this connection, expansion, fullness, brightness, high resolution. But it's having the ease with that
Right.
indicates that you are much more in that window where you're really present in the body and aware. So that's, I mean, that's kind of the goal, is when we can be really aware of what's inside, how we're moving, what's happening out there, and we're not in a reactive, high effort, I'm vigilant to everything state.
Right.
So, as you say, the two extremes.
Right. Okay.
I'm checked out because this is habit and practice, and I'm really just putting my body through a practice rather than paying attention to what's the pressure like through my feet or my hands on the mat. Can I feel where my skin is contacting my skin in a different posture where your legs might be crossed? Can you sense the muscles stretching or tightening? Are you aware of the sounds in the room, or have you totally lost that? Are you seeing anything?
Right.
You know, again, it's like the senses open up because they're not needing to be vigilant to anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I mean, it's a really delicious experience when you're not used to it. It's like high resolution just happened. That's cool. And you know, you're very aware of yourself, but you're also more available to be connected to others.
Right.
And that's what we're designed to be. You know, we're designed to be able to know, this is me, these are my boundaries, this is what I can do, this is what it feels like, and I can connect to you, and I recognize you're somebody different with their own experience. But we have this dynamic between us. It's what happens when the physiology doesn't have to work as hard.
Right. Just
You know,
let the body do its thing. Yeah.
the body do its thing, and sometimes, you know, if we encourage the body, it does some pretty amazing things.
Right. Right.
And we're particularly known for saying, okay, well, this is the body, it's the physical body. Oh, and here's the mind, that's the thinking part. Oh, that's the brain or the mind. Oh, and then there's breath, and then there's voice. Well, really, it's all one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're separating them and we're saying, in your example, the body's moving through the postures and you can track your breath, but your thinking is elsewhere, then that means that something is a little bit disconnected. And so what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do, what I try to get my clients to do, is to get more connection with themselves.
Right.
So easier,
Right.
way less energy. It's difficult to accomplish when we haven't learned how to do it properly, but it's really easy. You don't waste energy. You're not holding back the gas pedal. Everything can just flow. And then the resilience comes from that place too. It's like, oh, wow, something big happened, but I'm really okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that was exciting. And now I can come back because there's all of these different ways that I can find myself again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very cool.
But, yeah, we're seeing that collectively right now, definitely, where you can see the people who are really resilient, who are comfortable going, okay, this is difficult. Times are changing. There's something else out there. And we're just working through it.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's jump to that. The kind of the talking about the waters that we swim in. We're swimming in some waters of uncertainty for sure for a lot of people. Of
Yeah.
you talked about all these patterns that we have of ways
Yeah.
of being in the world that make us feel safe, because probably they're just familiar patterns, and that's where the safety comes from. And
Yeah.
it's like the carpet for many people has been pulled out, and those patterns can't run anymore, and maybe quite instantly for a lot. How would that show up for people? How would they know if the carpet has kind of been pulled up and they're experiencing their ways having to change?
Most people will recognize it. They may not be able to put it into this language, but they'll recognize it. They're more concerned about things. There's a sense of urgency. They may be starting to really focus on like survival level things. All of the hoarding in grocery stores and things like that comes from that deep survival, like, I need to be okay. How do I make myself okay? They may be obsessing with the news. They may be ignoring the news. They may be blocking things out. They may be frantically calling loved ones. Like, there's all of these little behaviors that people will recognize something has changed. And so anytime the carpet gets pulled out of us, pulled out from under us, the speed at which it gets pulled out impacts how well we adapt.
Right.
It's like there's all kinds of benefit to things moving slowly. We're able to make changes more gradually. Sometimes those big shifts are what actually shake up the nervous system and our patterns to be able to do something different.
Right.
So behaviors, definitely one of the ways people will be noticing. Then internally, the speed of their thinking, whether they're able to think, because we're gradually dropping down into that more animalistic brain, which is more survival oriented. So people who have a strong thinking capacity will be trying to outsmart stuff.
Right.
Lots of thinking, lots of ideas, and it may not be creative. It may just be a lot of thinking and analysis. There may be an inability to process what's happening. Like, there's a state of shock. Like, I don't know, my brain's not online. I'm forgetting things. I thought I did that. So the thinking is a really common one. Then the general level of activation in the body, which a lot of people call stress or anxiety. I recognize it as something different because I deal with this physiological understanding. So it's just, there's more inside that's rattling around that doesn't know what to do, because all of these coping strategies of daily life have been removed. And so once we've got more sympathetic drive happening in the body, we don't sleep as well. Our measure of eating appropriate amounts goes off, our digestion can go off, our heart rate can change, our breathing changes, our ability to meditate may not be as good, you know, doing practice of whatever form may be more challenging, and yet those consistent, predictable activities are what create normalcy for our animal. It's what allows us to go, oh, you know what? Like, look, I'm still working through my yoga. I'm still sitting. I'm still going for a walk. I'm still having dinner with my family. Like, all of those things remind the nervous system that it's not all threat.
Right.
So I'm a huge proponent of a practice, whatever it is, whether it's your family, a relationship, yoga, meditation, writing, good conversations with people, maintaining that routine. It's remarkable how the routine becomes routine and it gets boring until we need it.
Right.
And then it becomes really essential to bring us back to ground. Right.
Right. Almost
Yeah.
using it as a big tree trunk to lean on and trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
You know, and just like you were saying of doing yoga, where sometimes you can find yourself checking out, it's because that tree trunk is so familiar
Yeah.
that you don't need to pay as much attention.
Right.
But when the world outside of us starts to give us information that creates some concern or some uncertainty, boy, that tree trunk feels good again. Like, you start to notice all the little pieces of the bark on it, and it's like, oh, safe ground, secure stability, right? It's the familiar.
Right.
And that's, I mean, that's a gem to have something like that.
Yeah.
And nature, you know, nature has cycles in it. It's a really good thing. It continues to grow and change. It goes through birth and death and rebirth, and grows and dies and rebirth constantly. And so getting out into nature, sitting by ocean waves or going through the forest, walking by a river, actually helps our bodies attune to those natural cycles and be okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Such a good reminder. Get out in nature. You
Well,
mentioned.
I've
Yeah. Go ahead.
I just let's both talk at once. I just want to say it's been really interesting for me to see how many of my friends have taken up gardening in the last month. They're like, I'm going to plant seeds. Oh, look, I like this. It's growing, because it's got some of that delay and wait, and things are changing, and it will grow. It will show up. We just don't know when and don't know how, but it's interesting to see how people are finding ways to connect with nature.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every seed you plant, there has to be a little bit of faith and not knowing what's going to happen. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And as adults, we just get really sucked into the idea that we know what's going to happen.
Oh yes. You mentioned say these waters we're swimming in with a bit of this collective overwhelm, and you also said there's opportunity in it when
Mhm.
the carpet gets pulled and it really makes you perhaps illuminates how you've been showing up to the world. Could you speak of what is that potential there, even though maybe not the easiest?
Yeah, it's a hard way to learn, but it's also the way we learn a lot of things in life. You know, when you're learning to walk, you don't just stand up and walk. You crawl, you stand, you fall down, you take a few steps, you fall down, you go back to crawling. Like, it hurts. There's sort of these growing pains that we experience. And so with this shift that seems to be enforced on many of us right now, just the circumstances which are so difficult for so many people, it also is like putting a big container on all of the strategies that maybe were keeping people from knowing their own animal. And whether that's, okay, you know what, you're going to spend some time with your family.
Right.
And you're going to figure out how to relate to them when it's difficult, instead of going off to work, instead of siding with the child when the teacher's having to discipline them. Like, it's kind of like we're all being forced to recognize how beautiful and difficult and complex being human is. And that's our animal again. You know, like, that's like, okay, I've chosen to have this situation in my life. What's the fullness of the situation? Who do I really want to put my energy towards? What work really lights me up? Am I doing that? So, you know, as devastating as this is, having that carpet pulled out, it can also be like a little bit of a pause button where you can see, like, you know what, that job, I really need the income, but I really hate the job. I'm compromising myself the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do that. So if I don't want to do that, but I need the income, maybe there's a way to figure out a different plan. Like, maybe now is a time to start building other avenues, or really focusing on how you can make the job better or more aligned for what you want. So there's always great opportunity from these difficulties,
Right.
if we choose to take them, but it's a little bumpy.
Yeah.
A lot bumpy for some, right?
Yeah. My favorite word is messy. It gets messy. But
Yeah. And
yes.
messy is fun.
Mm-hmm.
You know, messy is creative and it's fun, but it's unpredictable.
Right. Right.
And so when we've kind of numbed ourselves to these parts of us that can be really resilient and go, oh, I never thought of doing it that way, or, oh my gosh, I'm going to cry, and I never cry. Well, once you cry, it's done and you can do something different. It actually carves out more space in your system to do something new.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I mean, that's the mess,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's messy. When you get through messy is always creative. If you've got artist friends, they'll all tell you that's the best thing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's
I know a
having
few of them.
15 ideas going at once. Yeah.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, a question. This is a question for me because I'm very curious. What's your? Because I know you're a bit of a geek when it comes into this world and studying all this. And what's fascinating you right now? What's kind of the edge of your curiosity with your work and with your learning and studies?
So I get fascinated really easily. This is one of my management strategies, where I just sink myself into learning and I forget that it's just learning for learning's sake. And sometimes I have to do a course correction on, you know, you're learning about something you don't actually want to know about. But I love the process of learning. So that has been a big theme for me, to recognize when I'm learning purely for the sake of learning rather than the enjoyment of what I'm learning.
Hmm.
So it's like, I like the intellectual part, but I don't always like the results. I have an engineering degree. I'm not doing engineering work. And, you know, I can see how it all links together. And I actually understand engineering much better now that I understand human physiology.
Hmm.
Like, those things sync up for me now, but they never did when I learned engineering. So yeah, I geek out on things and I have to be careful of that. That's my bad habit. Honestly, what I am loving is, and this is true with anybody that I work with, I love when the light bulb goes on for them.
Hmm.
I always geek about that. I love when they get a piece of understanding, when they navigate something and their body tissues change tone and they can sense it and feel it, or when they recognize, like, it's high res now. I love that moment. You know, that's just pure delight at seeing another person come alive. And then, honestly, what I'm geeking out on right now, poetry.
Hmm.
Uh, so my own journey was very physical. So there's not a lot of words spoken in a childhood of high performance sport. There is an awful lot of words dictated to you and not a lot of words that are allowed to be spoken back. I also grew up in a family that's very intellectual. And so, you know, when you spoke, you better have a good curiosity and understanding about what you were saying. So I'm a pretty quiet person by history. I'm a keen observer. I don't use my voice willingly and messily. And as I've gone through all of my work and my own healing and my own explorations and my studies, I'm at a point now where I'm integrating voice back into my body, but voice as expression. So I'm geeking out on David Whyte, and I'm geeking out on literature and wanting to hear it spoken and actually reading things out loud rather than reading them quietly in my head. I find things online where it's somebody reading a story just to bring voice and story and physicality back together for me. And so that's my own personal little kind of geek out. It's like, look, voice comes back. And I'm always fascinated with developmental stages in people and how there's the patterning and the fractals that we see through, you know, conception to birth. Oftentimes we'll see patterns that are reflected in development of somebody's childhood, and then that gets expanded a little bit more, and there will be these themes that run through people's lives. And I find that interesting. You know, I'm definitely somebody who is curious about what's the thread. What's that person all about? What is it? How did they find that? Do they recognize they're doing that?
Right.
You know, I love that stuff. And then, you know, pretty much anything that's got numbers, math, numbers, physics, that kicks in there as well.
Cool.
So it all meshes.
Lovely. Lovely.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, from this conversation and from you, I'm taking away your passion for curiosity and your excitement for what you do. It's very contagious just talking with you to see how passionate you are with all this. And yeah, it's quite lovely.
Thanks. The curiosity makes life so much better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So much better. And I remember for years reading the Einstein quote that said there are only two ways to approach life. And I can't remember it exactly, but it's basically that everything is a miracle or nothing is a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't understand it for years. I'm like, a miracle is supposed to be an event, a one-time thing. And it's like, no, it's fascinating that somebody actually can't sense their right foot in front of them in the warrior pose. Wow, I can. They can't. So what formed their experience that way? And do they want to feel it? What would that be like? So yeah, the curiosity is just fabulous in all senses. Yeah.
So awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for this conversation, Karin. It's so lovely, and I think it'd be very helpful for people to get a, just get a sense where you come from and some of those tips and um, ideas and images you poetically shared with us today, using your
Yeah.
skills of the voice and the throat. Yeah. Any last words or things you'd like to leave with, or ways to kind of keep in touch with you, or anything like that?
So last words, I would love to leave all of your community with the idea of really exploring their senses and noticing what happens when they do. So as we've been talking, I have one of my standard props that I use with clients in my hands, which is a little teeny tiny slinky.
Mm.
And just feeling it, like giving yourself permission to feel something and explore it and be curious, or to look at something, or to listen, to feel the exact shape on the chair that your body is creating. So really inviting them into their bodies, into all of those senses of their bodies, and to know it's okay if you feel something different than somebody else or hear something different. And then staying in touch. I'd love to stay in touch with you and your folks. My website was under construction before everything happened, and right in terms of the world respecting coronavirus and those changes. I'm not working on my website at all right now, but it's up there, and it's karinmelin.com. So people can reach me through that. And I'd love to just keep promoting people to find their inner animal, because the animal's good.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for this, Karin.